Okay, welcome to another episode of What the Haze. I am your host, Hayes Wolfenden, and with me is my friend Travis Byram. Welcome, Travis.
Hi, Hayes. It's good to be back. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, more
You've
than
had some
welcome,
great
to be honest.
episodes since our last talk.
Yeah, thanks. I love, just love talking to writers is the absolute truth about it. I think number one. I feel like I'm learning a ton just by, talking to, different writers from around the world. Plus, I think it makes me more open minded as well. I also like the idea of, especially writers that are published, for
Mhm.
example, if it's indie publishing, I like to kind of promote them a little bit, to be honest. I
Sure.
get a buzz out of that. I think not enough writers, even the ones that are maybe traditionally published, not enough, people have enough, other people, promoting them and trying to say, hey, this person, is a really good writer and maybe you should check them out, that kind of things. Again, I think it's good to have a podcast with, writers around the world, and it's not all famous writers, and even the famous writers, there's sorry, I should say traditionally published writers. There's different kinds of people, like that, Curtis Chin, for example, a
Mm.
memoirist. I'd never have thought to have a memoirist on my show. Not that I'm against that. I just didn't occur to me. So,
Well, and
yeah, no, I think it's
he was
fantastic.
he was established doing other work, right? It was his memoir that got the attention, but wasn't he? Isn't he a TV or a film writer
Yeah,
as
I think
well?
he's a screenwriter and a
Yeah.
playwright as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just something else. It's like something else. Like, you might write a play someday or something like that. Or something that gets
Yeah, I mean
adapted to
that's
screen.
yeah, I think it's a great way to kind of go into it. I know that George Martin, that's what he was doing. He was a screenwriter. And I
Sure.
think if you then decide to write a novel or a memoir or whatever, you're going to know people in the industry and it's going to be a massive help to you. Absolutely. For sure.
Yeah.
But so what about your writing at the moment, Travis? What have you been up to?
So my writing at the moment, I've been on a holiday break, so I've been crafting some short stories that I've had the ideas for a while. So I had the luxury of time to put pen to paper and get them written. Just two, it's like I was telling before, two very different stories, just different styles, different narrative structure. One's a little bit more traditional, a person point of view. You got the view of a character, a stranger who's just arrived in a town in the Old West in the late 1800s. And then one is like a science fiction story told through vignettes. So there's no real character, so to speak of. It's just kind of random people talking about experiences they have through a spa where people are given near death experiences because they have like these, what they feel are like these religious awakenings and things like that, because it kind of plays on the idea not too dissimilar from like Total Recall and things like that, where people become bored of life, so they keep kind of upping the ante. Like, what can I do? What can I do to give myself a kind of like a thrill in the brain, kind of thing. So I kind of wanted to explore that phenomenon.
Yeah, they both sound really interesting. I got to say that the second one I liked. It was vignettes, the
Yeah.
idea of like different voices. I'm
Yes.
I'm
Exactly.
listening to you now, and I'm like, yeah, I'd love to read it. It just sounds
Yeah.
interesting and a different way of telling a story. Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah,
So,
I
what
had read
inspired
some
you?
writers recently that kind of wafted into that style, where they kind of break these traditional styles of narrative, and it's fun to experiment with that, because don't get me wrong, I like lots of different writing styles, but this is just something I wanted to play with, something I've never tried before.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair as well, like it's something I'm aware of as well. Is like when you're doing writing, try something new, try
Mm,
something different, push
sure.
yourself. It might not work, but you will learn from it. You will get better. I think sometimes with my poetry, I don't do that much now. But for my story writing, I'm always thinking every novel, just do something different. And it doesn't have to be a huge difference. It just be a little bit, have a character that's different from what you normally would do, or set your buck doing something, doing, a different setting than you would normally use. All these things, and over time, you just get better. That's the way I
Yeah.
think about it.
Weren't
Anyway.
you saying that you, for your newer book, the one about, is it like a kind of apocalyptic novel?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
are
yeah,
you
yeah.
writing it in the first person this time, or are you still in?
Yeah, I'm writing in the but I've been doing the first person for a while. But
Okay.
what was the new thing I was doing about it was like I was setting it in Manhattan. And of
Mm.
course, I'm not from America, and I've just
Yeah.
experimented the last 2 or 3 books setting books in America. That's probably the last one I'll do of that. I just quite like
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
that.
I wrote I wrote a novella set in Baltimore. I've never been to Baltimore because
Yeah, I
it was
think.
it was based on a guy who was obsessed with the television show The Wire and wanted to do similar things, which The Wire takes place in Baltimore. Baltimore's kind of a notorious city for crime and things like that. So I set it there. And I remember I did some research with looking things up, but I didn't do like a lot. I felt I didn't have to because this wasn't really Baltimore. It was like a very, very fictional Baltimore, you know?
Yeah, it's the thing about like research. I tend to believe you shouldn't do a lot. Like,
Mm.
especially in this day and age where you've got the internet and you've got phones, most of the time, especially when you're editing, you can just go, "Hey, wait, I'll just check. I'll check
Yeah,
this one fact. I'll check."
yeah,
And a lot of the time, you are right anyway.
yeah.
Lee Child said this about Jack Reacher, and people always say to him, "Oh, it seems like you know so much about what it's like to be like, in the military." And he says, "Well, no, I don't. It's just
Right.
that this information is out there already, and we can just kind of imagine it." So,
Yeah. Well, it wasn't Ian
so
Fleming in Her Majesty's Secret Service, something like that. But he wasn't
yeah,
like
he
an
was. Yeah.
operative. He wasn't like a traditional spy. He was more on the other receiving end of it. Maybe it was kind of, pictured it as something like maybe he wanted to be this kind of person, or maybe he didn't, and he wanted to warn people about this kind of person. I really don't know what is it, nor have I read any of like James Bond fiction.
Yeah, me
But I mean,
neither. I think, yeah, he was
he would
in the
have
Secret
some
Service.
knowledge, but he wouldn't have all the knowledge of someone like James Bond would, or someone like that would exist, you know.
But this is a good point. You're in the life. It's like
Mm.
just say for argument's sake, we've often joked in the past about working at the DMV. But let's just
Yeah.
say you wanted to write a book about, I don't know, the DMV. If you work there, it stands to reason you're just going to know everything about it, even if you don't per se do one of the jobs or something. I'm a big
This
believer in living it.
Yeah, this may sound weird, but I would think that if you worked in the DMV and you were or became a talented writer, it could be really interesting. Like it would be funny to me. Like it would be Kafka-esque. You'd have all these people acting out. Because if like I've been to the DMV a lot. Sometimes you see people because they're frustrated. You're waiting in line, and then they're like, "Oh, you don't have this. I can't help you. You've wasted 2 hours or more of your life." People get upset, so I've seen this, and I've seen a lot of this unfold because I've lived it a lot. Because I remember back in the States, one of the aspects of my job is trying to help people get IDs. And I know now it's like if you're missing pieces of of your own life documentation, it becomes harder. So I know what to do, and so like, oh, we can't help you here, but you need this. And then it kind of like my knowledge builds up, but you see people just come unglued and have these, meltdowns of rage, or just, and these people just have to deal with it, or they don't really deal with it well, and it's just kind of funny. So I think if someone wrote about the DMV, it could be hilarious. It could be Kafkaesque. It could be, you know, really
Yeah,
funny,
I
or maybe
wonder
about a guy who dreams of
the
something more
DMV what would
exciting than that,
happen.
but he
I tend to
doesn't
believe
realize that
that
everything is
most
kind of
people.
funny unfolding before his eyes. I don't know.
Yeah, I was just going to say about the DMV. I tend to believe that. I think most people that would work for them, just say for argument's sake, they're writing in their own, private time. I imagine that working for something like that is so soul crushing that
Yeah.
they the if they were, going to keep doing it, they would be the type of person to leave and to do something else and to do this and to do that. And then they become famous. I think
Yeah,
staying
of
at the
course.
DMV for 30, 40 years. But then I forgot the name. I think it might have been Anthony Trollope. He was a British writer. I think he worked for the post office.
Yeah,
I,
Charles Bukowski famously and he wrote a
yeah.
book called The Post Office.
So you
And
never
I
know. You never know sometimes.
You never know, but I think he wrote while he was working at the post office. Most assuredly he did poetry and prose. And didn't Goethe uh he worked for some kind of government agency in Austria, I think. I'm not sure. Or he was some kind of government clerk. As was Dickens too. Dickens had kind of a boring job. Wasn't he a copywriter or something like that
I think he was
before?
working for the courts, but like
Yeah,
he was
something like
copying it down. Yeah, I think like yeah, he was, and
yeah.
that's where he got a lot of the ideas and stuff, and saw a lot of like some of the hypocrisies in society and stuff.
Sure.
I mean, thing is when we're talking about it, it makes me realize, it makes me really think about like you know writers, great writers, they don't go to like Oxford and Cambridge
No.
and study how to be a great writer and just become a great writer. I think most people come from very average, very random walks of life,
Yeah.
and they have good ideas. They write them down over a period of time, and then they become successful. I
Yeah.
think there's a lesson in that for all of us, really. I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's exceptions to that, but I think for the most part, that's a standard. It's like you went to graduate school for creative writing. You know, some people do and do make publish things, but a lot of them don't. I mean, it's just it depends. Or people that go to school for acting. You hear
Yeah.
actors interviewed. A lot of them do go to school for acting. A lot of them do start it very young in high school doing plays. It's just it depends. There's a writer, there's an American writer that I like, and he just was in bad health most of his life. I think he wrote mostly in the mid or earlier 20th century, and he was sick, and someone had told him, you should be a writer because then you don't have to go outside. And that was before like people could work on the internet. That was pre-internet. And he had very little education, like I think maybe high school, and he just kind of taught himself to be a writer. It's Hubert Selby Jr. Not sure if you're aware of him. He wrote
No.
things like The Demon, Last Exit to Brooklyn, and Requiem for a Dream, which was made into a film.
Yeah, the
I
last
think,
one seems familiar.
yeah, a couple of his books were made into film, but he just got a very unusual style too. He kind of he takes on the point of view different characters, and he kind of writes in their dialect and their mindset. It's really interesting, and especially since he didn't really have what we would call like the experience. He spent a lot of his time like inside. So
Yeah, I'm listening to that. It's interesting because normally I say to people like, get outside, experience
yeah,
life, do something different. I tend to, and it can work just staying inside, studying all the time. I get it. I tend to think it's probably more likely though that you would be unsuccessful
right.
if you just stay inside. If I just stay inside and just wrote, I don't think I'd be that good.
No,
But then, there's no 100% rule for anything for me,
no.
for me at all, to be honest. But yeah,
I
it's
just
interesting.
yeah I read a novel recently. One of the several that I read recently. One of the characters wanted to be a writer. It's told through the point of view of her friend, but she was like an aspiring writer, as in that's all that she wanted to be. And at one point in time, the narrator, who's kind of the voice of reason for the novel and for her, he tells her that very thing. He's like, you need to just go out. He's like, you need to have experiences. You can't just decide you're going to be a writer and lock yourself in a room because you hate people. He's like, you have to have some kind of thing happen to you, and this is gonna like stimulate your writing. So and I think in a way, I think this is like the author's way to kind of like stir things up. He's like, because I think that's what he came from, because he was very influenced, I think, by Hemingway. The
Right, yeah.
writer, yeah, it's Haruki Murakami. I think I've
Oh yeah, sure.
mentioned him.
I
He's
haven't
one
read
of my
his. I
favorites.
haven't read him. Yeah,
Yeah,
I haven't
he's
read him, and
good.
I do need to. Yeah, it's a fair point. Um, I
Uh,
mean, yeah, Hemingway, Orwell, Steinbeck,
well,
they're
that
very
he's
similar.
Japanese, obviously, and I think the reason he's broken through to the West and sold in many more countries than any other Japanese writer is because, well, no, I think there is another guy too. I shouldn't misspeak, but is because he was influenced by the classics, like the Greek classics, heavily, and also Hemingway. He references a bunch, and like when you read him, he has kind of that similar way of structure where he'll kind of describe like the day, the weather, and things like that at kind of the beginning of how when he starts to write something, and it kind of pulls you in. uh
Hmm.
they're unique in that, like writers like that. Like I think that I would like to do that, but I don't think that's something I would be good at, is like pulling someone into like this level of reality. Like, can you smell what's in my kitchen, all these things. Like, to a point I think everyone can, but to like this upper echelon, I think it's a gift. I think it's really hard to do that. And if you want to read him, then hit me up, because uh, I'm not sure, because a lot of his stuff is magical realism, but a lot of it isn't. So if you're not into magical realism, that could bother you. I think like you'd be like, I don't like it. But if you like want to start with him and read something that's not he's got lots of writing that isn't magical realism. That's just what he's known for. So that's just, something to keep in mind, because you had Ariella on, and she had some bits of magical realism peppered into some of her stories.
Yeah, for me, magical realism it's something I'm not really that familiar with. And to be fair to Ariel, I said to her, "Yeah, I think you should pass the story on to somebody who's more knowledgeable about magical realism. Does this work?" Because I was approaching those stories a bit like, if you remember when we were at the Nanjing school together, like I forgot the name now. The author, the Asian American author that did like the Paper Tiger.
Paper Menagerie,
Yeah, Paper
right?
Menagerie, and then there was Amy Tan. And
Yeah,
to me, her stories were more like that, more like kind of a bit like a kind of fictionalized memoir. But at the same time, I haven't really read magical realism, so I'm not the best expert. And to be fair, I sh- I think if I was going to read some, I'd want to read the best. So I would right. This is what it should look like or should
yeah,
sound like.
that's a fair point.
Um,
But that's, again, that's really hard, because I read a lot of magic realism, but then I read a lot of non just different things as well, different genres, and
mhm.
sometimes there's lines where you're like, is it magical realism? I was like, I actually sat down and asked myself, what is magical realism? Because I'm reading a novel now by a British author, and it's got supernatural elements in it, but it's told through the point of view of a child, and it's not what I would call magical realism at all. It has a lot of weird made up stuff in it, yes, but at the same time I'm like, this isn't really what I would call magical realism. I think with magical
Okay.
realism there has to be more like of an interaction, I think, between the characters and what's going, or they know what's going on and they're complacent with it. That's how I kind of see magical realism. But this book I'm reading now, I got through another author. Another author had recommended it on something I watched. It's a British author. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. Edward Carey. Have you heard of him?
No, no.
But I'm reading this right now. This is what I'm currently reading. I think it's one of his latest novels. It's just phenomenal. It's incredible. It's very layered, really good characters. It's the premise is a young girl who's sick and can't leave the theater. Her father's like a theater owner and an actor, and it's in, is it Norwich? Is that how you pronounce it? In England, Norwich?
Norwich,
Norwich.
Norwich,
Yeah, it's in
Norwich.
Norwich. So it's that's
Okay.
the only world she knows. So she reads about Norwich, she reads about the history, and she writes her own play based on an urban legend in Norwich. and it's incredible. It's really interesting. So that it has all this kind of ghost elements and ghost story stuff in it, but I wouldn't call it magical realism at all. It's because it's not. You have the unreliable narrator aspect where this is a little girl who's
Okay.
never left her home because they fear that there's a curse on her and she will die. But at the same time, there's all this weird stuff that happens. Like the town is plagued with these bugs that people like
Okay.
they're these beetles, and then they someone in the town in like the earlier centuries starts turning them into food and like a jam that they eat with like bread. It's weird in that it's like this is bullshit. It's not real, but at the same time you're buying it. But I still wouldn't call it magical realism. It's kind of like urban legend type stuff, and like
Yeah,
lore.
don't it? Is it it's not an alternate universe, is it? Like
No,
the
no.
no.
In a way, it's kind of like it seems like accurate, at least to her telling of it. It's a theater house in Britain in 1901,
Yeah.
so they would have existed.
Okay.
It would have been very you don't have electricity, right? You don't have cars, but at the same time, it's like on the precipice of that being, and it's set right in the time where it's the end of the Victorian era, and Edward is king, so it's the beginning of the Edwardian England. But
Yeah.
it is I don't think they try to be weird in that realm. It's not like where you're reading it and you're like, this is too weird. It's all a little bit, some of it's weird, but a lot of it's believable is what I'm saying. But it's still not in that realm of like what I would call magical realism. Like it's really funny, and you kind of get a sense that like this character, this protagonist's life is not very good, but she doesn't realize it because the father's kind of an
Hmm.
eccentric and he's been married multiple times and they die. Because again you have to balance with, well, it's the early 20th century, but also it's weird because he's a weird character. So you kind of have to consider all these things when you read it. You have to kind of suspend belief, but it doesn't go out of its way to be weird, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, yeah, yeah. It sounds interesting to me.
It's a really interesting
Kind of like
book.
all the ghost stuff.
It is, but
Yeah.
it can be like creepy. It can be like, I wouldn't call it horror, but it's definitely in that vein. It's definitely a little bit spooky and unusual. Like she starts seeing things that aren't there, and but I mean, reality would tell someone that this could happen because she's lonely, right? She doesn't have friends. It talks about at one point she had this friend that was like the daughter of a cleaner because people are in the theater. Like she sees lots of people, but this girl, something happens and she leaves, so she doesn't have any contact. She doesn't have a friend. So you kind of feel like bad, like there's this big detachment kind of thing, and you feel like that from her point of view, her relationship with her father is great. It's wonderful, but but when you're reading it as the reader, you're like, it's not so great, and I kind of like that. It's like she's not seeing what's really there.
Yeah, it sounds interesting to me. Listen,
Mhm.
I'd love to write like a ghost story, but I don't have any ideas that I would consider are original or near enough
Sure.
original that it would make that splash. Otherwise, I think what's the point? You know.
Yeah,
But no, I love reading stuff like that.
yeah,
It's kind of interesting as well as you were talking about it. Like, yeah, people don't realize that the theatre, certainly in the UK and America, would be the same. And in 1901, that was like the movies. Everyone
exactly.
around the country
Yeah,
rammed.
yes,
That was like the major art form. And
yes.
like within, I'm not sure when did Hollywood start? When did it start going to like silent movies?
He's maybe
When
before,
they
like,
start,
but what happened was there was a transition between vaudeville and Hollywood, because if you remember, like Charlie Chaplin, who was British but became an American star,
yeah,
he was in vaudeville first in the UK, and in the US. The Three Stooges were in vaudeville. So at some point in time, there was that transition. It would have been with the advent of films, and that was one of the many inventions where like they thought it was like a parlor trick. They're like, no one's gonna care about films. Like this is stupid, like it's theater, But of course, look what happens. It's the same with telephone, internet. Everything is like, the inventions are like, pish posh, but no, it is that. Like I think that, and because of that, I think you also get a sense that the character in this novel has like this inflated sense of ego about like where she is because she's written a play. She's part of this dynasty of actors and theater people. So she kind of has a higher opinion of herself than she should, if that makes sense. It's kind of, but
Yeah, yeah,
again,
yeah. I mean,
there was a time too before that even like where actors were considered like the lowliest of the low, like just traveling through cities like gypsies and transient
yeah,
people and just putting on shows, and they were like untouchables. This was before like they were stars, right? It's really interesting. Like so, like if you watch like TV shows or films set in the old west, if they have people that are actors, then they would have been kind of like looked down upon. They would have
oh
they
yeah,
considered low class. But I don't know how it was in England, like for history, like because like again, it's like you said, that was entertainment. You would have gone to the theater, you'd have seen Shakespeare and Ibsen and everything.
there were some actors and actresses that were genuinely famous, like
Sure.
I think in the 19th and 18th centuries, but these were like British actors that would be doing Shakespeare,
Right.
not other things.
Right.
And they would be the, just the random lucky ones. Musicians is a funny one. Musicians, like until recently, it's a bit of a traveling salesman trade, going
Yeah.
from pub to pub, playing the
Yeah.
flute and stuff. It was not. You think about now, if you're in like Metallica or whatever,
Sure.
Rolling Stones, traveling the world, making millions, tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions. But like that's relatively new. If you think about
Yeah.
everything pre-rock and roll, most musicians, the best case scenario, you're in a symphony or you're in
Yeah.
a traveling band or something. But it's not. I mean, to be fair, if you're in, I don't know, let's say like a Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra, yeah, it's good. I'm sure it's really good. It's a
Sure.
really good job. You'll get paid well, but it's not like millions.
No.
You
No,
know,
and people like the Rolling Stones, that's the extreme. That's the exception. And I think that
yeah,
after, after the change in the music industry, it's gone back to the other thing. You basically have to be noticed on social media, and that could be a chance for you to be famous. And I think that if music is your passion, if that's really what you're going to do, most people have other jobs. They do it because they love it. And I think this is
yeah,
true with writers as well, because most writers aren't famous. Even writers that are very good are not famous, or they don't sell a lot. Every once in a while, I'll come across that. I'll have a book recommended to me, and the author is a professor or a teacher somewhere, or they have some other kind of job because they don't they can't make a living selling their books, even though their books are fantastic.
oh yeah. Unless you're lucky and you're like J.K. Rowling, Stephen King. A lot of writers they make their living by they sell some books. They might win prizes as well, but most of the their money they might be a lecturer in creative writing or something like that.
Yeah,
Without that extra bit of money, they'd find, making a living from writing very hard to come by. I think I once saw a stat a while back, and it was like the average salary for a writer in America was like just $16,000.
yeah.
So it's like it's only that
Which you
very
couldn't
few at the
survive on that
top.
at this day and age.
No,
That would
no,
be
no.
ridiculous. But I mean, that's the same for a musician too. Like maybe
Yeah, yeah,
if you were, it's like you said, like a pub musician, or you maybe had a place in an orchestra or a symphony. You might do all right, but you're not going to be famous. A lot of people they would have other sources of income, or they would be, you know, otherwise have other sources of money. I mean, just this is realistic. I mean, it's like that with teachers in some places. Sadly,
yeah. I mean, I suppose teaching's another one as well. But again, in the past, yeah, sure. If you were working for Eton, you'd be doing really well. But for most people, it's not very lucrative,
right?
And again, it's only been since maybe, I don't know, 80s, 90s, where, it is possible. Maybe I wouldn't say the 80s, maybe 90s, maybe the noughties, where, teachers can, if they get promotion, for example, can make a really decent amount of money. Then you've got like
Yeah.
the
Well,
teaching in the Middle East.
I think it varies a lot on those things. I think that sometimes it varies heavily on what you teach. A lot of people don't realize that. Like a lot of
Yeah,
the like a lot of the people that make money in teaching, they're teaching for like business schools, and because they're actually, they're skilled in some way, or they've published a bit, and they've gone on to a business school, and those folks tend to make higher salaries than, let's say, an English professor or
or
a
easily.
history professor. Does that make sense? Like, so
Yeah, totally.
it does vary a lot on what you teach, and it's just like uh writing. Like, a lot of people become writing teachers after they've published. Like, a lot of, like, even with not a lot of like academic degrees, like that happens a few times, where someone will get offered a position, like they've published several novels, like, can you come and teach, we're going to offer you this job, and they do it for the security, because like they might have like, it's like they might have a 3 book option, and the publisher's like, well, your second book didn't sell, so we're dropping you. That, wouldn't you
Yeah.
rather have a job? I mean, that's just kind of the way it is.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, I saw it was a social media post on Instagram, and there was this. She seems really nice, to be fair. This professor of creative writing, and like she has to kind of obviously really promote herself. Though I don't know if she's designing her own posts. Might be someone else doing it, to be honest. But it just makes you realize the extent that you've got to go to. You've got to write books. You've got to teach creative writing. You've got to be putting social media posts on a day, and they take time. So it's yeah. I mean, these days, like I say, I think it's becoming harder to make lots of money, especially when publishing companies. They're not stupid. They're making sure that they get most of the money. I think. On episode 5, there was a writer and illustrator, Eric Jangon,
Yeah.
and we were talking to him just a few days ago, and he was explaining to the other teachers at the table how much money he would make from any particular book sale, and it's
Not
peanuts. It's
It's
just
not a lot.
it's
Yeah.
just a few,
Yeah.
and everyone's like, oh my god, but like, it's like, yeah, it's stacked against you. And I think I
It
once
is.
read that, like, if you're a published writer and your book is on like offer, if the publisher sells that book, the author gets nothing, because it's on offer. Um, I heard another one is like, if you get like a large advance, it looks, oh yeah, great, you get a large advance, but I've also heard that, like, you won't get much money for a while after that.
Right. They
So you
recoup
might
it.
think, yeah, you think you've
It's
got a lot of money on paper, and you have, but if and just say it was like $500,000, just chuck it out there, something really big. But let's just say, you don't get any more money for 5 years. Okay, that's $100,000 a year. Oh, we forgot about tax. So that's going to be in a high tax band. So I bet the tax is around 40%. Suddenly you're losing a big chunk. You've got an agent who's probably charging 20%. So suddenly you're thinking, well, you've really only got a year now. What is that? 50, 60, 70, $70,000 tops. Oh, and you want to buy a house, and you're riding, and maybe you've got expenses, you've got to travel around the country and stuff. That's not amazing. That's just a job, isn't it? 60, 70,000 American dollars. And let's
Right.
just say that because of your publishing job, you need to be close, say, to New York, just somewhere big. Well, everything's more expensive. The houses are more expensive. You want to send your kids to good schools. It's not amazing. Like I say,
Yeah.
that's $500,000, and there might be people out there that they get more money after 5 years, and of course, there's some that will get it. Maybe a bit quicker. Um, but it's like J.K. Rowling's books. It wasn't until the third book, Prison of Azkaban, came out, which would be that's a few years after the first book now, that things really took off. So you just never know.
Sure. Absolutely. But yeah,
Actually, I was going to ask you as well. Sorry.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to going back to your short stories that you've just written, the two you've just written. Was there any, like, kind of like inspiration for it? Like, why did you pick those stories or the settings or anything like that?
No, it's like I said, I think we had talked about this before. Maybe I heard you talk about it on one of your other podcasts, like individually. Like, should you were saying you write down your ideas, you have notebooks full of ideas, but then some of them are not good. It's just like you kind of that's good, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what I want. But then I kind of have spoke to this before, where if I'm working and I'm working for my school, I get bogged down. I don't kind of have that relaxing flash that I need. So if I get these ideas, I do write them down. I try to get them on somewhere. I got I get some of my inspiration just from reading other stuff. And it doesn't even have to be fiction. Or I see something, I'm like, this would be a really good idea. And then be careful and do my research to make sure I'm not like, doing something that's already been done. Like I said, well, I like this style of writing, which is the British author, Gary Shipley, I think is his name. And he's writing these vignettes and there's no character. It's like you're getting the story through this kind of thing. And I like that. So I said I'm going to try something like that based on my own idea, and I kind of just created the idea. It's like, what can I do with this? And I just kind of built it from there. And with the Western, I got the idea, I think, from reading similar stuff. I think I was reading some old psychology texts.
Yeah. Okay.
And they were talking about hypnotism. And I was like, this would have been a weird thing. Because you never see this. You never, like, hear about um, any kind of therapist, hypnotist like this. This would have been unheard of, or they would have sort of laughed it off. So to me, the idea seems a little bit absurd, and I wanted to run with that. I was like, well, I'm going to buy this in, and what are people going to think? Well, yeah, he's like a carpetbagger. He's like a trickster. He's just going to steal your money, like this and that. So I was like, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to make it not what people expect. I'm going to make him. I'm going to make him do bad stuff, and it's not like what you're thinking is going to do. So like I just kind of went with that, and my ideas kind of built on themselves. I kind of created an outline. I fed it um, through different things. I changed some stuff. Yeah,
Okay.
and just kind of went from there.
You mentioned you created an outline. How did that help you, like writing, like obviously the first draft?
It's like I said, people, when you write a story, I think we've talked about this, or like it's a good idea to kind of know where you're going to end is important, like because I've heard of writers, even writers that I like, where like they'll write and they don't know that. I don't really buy that, to be honest. I think there has to be so like when I started writing, I started writing my novella like back in 2020. I just started writing it. I got the idea, I started writing it. But then, like, I think not even midway through it, like maybe after a couple of little chapters I wrote, I started to outline it and say, this is what I want to happen. Because otherwise you're just
Ah,
going to go nowhere. But I do that with short stories as well. It's like, so this guy comes in, he's a stranger to this town, in Arizona territory in the late 1800s. What's it gonna look like? So I kind of build from there, and then I kind of have my outline structure, and then I did change things once I started writing it. I'm like, well, this might be better, this might be better, and it's always like a work in progress. I might not be happy with the end result and maybe want to change something else. It's like I said, it's like I think it's a big mistake to write something and then just throw it out. I think that's a big mistake because like there's things in there that I think that would be good. Either you're crafting really good sentences, you're crafting a good narrative, you're crafting good characters, something salvageable. So I don't ever waste any of my writing, even if I don't think it's good, even if I'm not happy with it. I mold it. I mold it over. I let it simmer. I go back to it. I'm like, well, maybe I can turn this into something else. Uh, just things like that. So yeah, I do outline. Is like where I was saying I got distracted with some noise. But I do like even a short story. I kind of like know where I'm going. Like with this one about the American West, I knew where it was going to end. Um, so I just kind of had to fill in the middle. I like so what's good. So there might be things that change. Like it's like I said, if I give it to you and you read it, like I like this, but maybe this in the timeline should be here, or maybe this is more important here, because then the reader will be like, oh, this is really like this is good, but then something happens and it's more exciting. You know what I'm saying? You have to kind of have eyes on your story.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like the idea of the outline. It's interesting in like writing today, like outlining, like, at least on social media, is kind of like, I wouldn't say frowned upon. That's not the right word. It's like people talk about, I'm a discovery writer. I just have an idea and I just start writing. I get it. I say to anybody, at the end of the day, whatever you do, it's got to work for you. And what does
Yeah,
that mean?
absolutely.
It means completing the project. If
Sure.
I mean, I saw someone online recently, and hey, to be fair, they're a published, author, more published than I am, and they're what they would call a discovery writer, and they just write. But she's talking online about having writer's block, and I don't know what writer's block is. I'll be honest. I'll tell the world. I have no idea. For me, writer's block is something other people have, but for me, it's like if something's not right if you find that you can't write.
No,
There's nothing. Yeah,
absolutely.
for me, and I do tend to believe that when it comes to outlining, and listen, and again for everyone around there, my outlines are very basic. I need to know the
Absolutely.
ending.
Yeah.
It's a few grammatically incorrect paragraphs as a whole, but I always plan ahead, like the next chapter or next few chapters. Again, grammatically incorrect. Sometimes what I plan doesn't happen. In fact, maybe even most of the time it doesn't happen. I just feel like it's a decent, like, guidebook, so to speak, or
Yeah.
a map
Absolutely.
for me to
And I
kind of
think
go down.
you gotta establish these things, right? So what is an outline? It's like you said, it's a very basic thing. I made one. Did I adhere to it like a rule book? Absolutely not. It's just like I wanted to know like where things are going to happen, because it actually kept me disciplined. It kept me writing, and I was amazed at how fast I was able to write. And to address what you're talking about, writer's block, what I think that is writer's block is just saying something's keeping you from writing. It's absolutely correct. It's not any one thing. There's no such thing as you have writer's block. There could be something going on psychologically. You could be under stress. I mean, anything A through Z. You're gonna have something that's gonna keep you from doing. And that's really what it is. It's like for me. It's I always want to write, but there's always I'm quick to find an excuse, and I have to fight through it. It's like, well, I'm tired, or well, I have to do this lesson plan, or I have an IB class coming up, or something like that. It's just you have to just budget it. It's like you said, you were writing on the commute bus. If you
Yeah.
want to do it, you're going to do it. So as far as writer's block is, I just think it's not a real thing, other than it's explaining there's some reason for your not being able to write. Um,
Yeah.
and like going back to like not having an outline, like Jack Kerouac, right? Famously, he probably didn't go with outlines, but at the same time, his novels are so based in realistic things. It's just like this is the start and this is the end. It's naturally just there. He doesn't need to like outline it out. Maybe I don't know. I don't know too much about him in depth, but like, did his publisher like, no, you can't do this or this or this? But like he's doing this stream of consciousness, and he's writing just like large amounts of stuff. But at the same time, there is a beginning of a story, of a narrative, and there's an end. So
Yeah.
something has to happen. I mean, he might have just had like, I'm taking this trip across country, and it's just going to be like I'm going to write it out, and there's still structure there.
Sure. Yeah, it's weird that with like this, if you're an outline writer or you're a discovery writer, it's weird at the moment. It seems to be that there's not a 50-50 split for write. It tends to be discovery writers, from what I can see online, it's like 99%. But that's something I object to, this idea of I'm a discovery writer. What do you mean? All writing is discovering.
Right.
you know, whether you use an outline or not. You're discovering when you're outlining, when you've done an outline and then you're trying to, write it out. You're discovering as you go along. I find that a
Yeah.
bit conceited,
I
to be
suppose
honest.
though, like I suppose there's people that can do that in a sense too. Like they maybe they have an idea and they just start writing, but at the same time, what are they going to be doing? They're going to go back and edit it. They're still applying these rules to it. They're just doing it in a different order. Does that make sense? Because
Yeah, yeah,
you turn
yeah,
something in.
totally.
If you're writing your stream of consciousness, like everyone's not writing, what is it, Finnegan's Wake? Like experimental thing, like yeah, that's a bunch of just stream of consciousness stuff, and that's interesting, yeah. But at the same time, it's like everyone's not reproducing something like that because if something like that was to come out today, it would be really hard for people to want to read it. Like I read stuff I think where people are gonna find it hard to read, or like I'm just reading this like who is this person writing to other than like weirdos like me who want to read this kind of bizarre stuff. Like it makes you wonder. But some way or another something has to be applied. Maybe it's not with them and their process. Like yeah, I know you do a lot of your own editing, your own read throughs and things like that. But maybe they write a bunch of stuff and they send it to someone and like they have a literary agent or publisher and they just like I'm cutting this out and they're like okay with it. And they're like all right sure. Or like
Yeah, I mean, to be
you have no
honest,
ending to this. This is just a bunch of shit
yeah,
written down. You're like okay, let's end it. And like maybe they work with them. It's like they sit there and have a conversation because I do believe that some people probably wouldn't be able to do that. Like or they would have like you say like they would have like this prejudice against putting the structure down either at the beginning or at the end of the process. They might have this prejudice like I'm not going to do that. And then but it's getting done in some way shape or form it's going to get done.
yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think for me, when it comes to like writing, I think the most important phase is editing. I tend to write stream of consciousness when I'm doing it. I mean,
Sure.
look,
Me
don't
too.
get me wrong. And again, I'm sure there's times where I don't, and I stop and I go, wait, what have I done? But I try to just get it down,
Yeah.
and then I have to edit, put it through 5 or 6, edits. I mean, I do
Yeah.
edit a lot of my own stuff, but that's more by necessity. It's just the fact that I'm a you know indie writer or you know
Yeah, but I don't know about
unpublished writer.
you. Like you probably have your own things. Like I find like because when I was rereading back this story because I just wrote it. Now I'm going back and reading
Yeah.
it for the first time. Like I do have these things that I will do. Like I try to fix any like a minor idiosyncrasy might happen. Like I said this, but I later on I said this. I gotta fix that. That's easy. But sometimes I do things that I don't like. Like I'll repeat words. Like I think some of that is okay, and other writers do this and they're fine with it. But like I don't like to constantly use, you know, sultry in place of humid or something like that. Like oh, I have to do this. I
Okay.
have to because if you it sounds I'm trying to think of the right word. Like it stops the reader. Like you're like this is weird. Like I've seen this word like through. I don't like that. So I catch weird things like that in my own writing. Does that make sense?
I know what you mean. Yeah, it does
Yeah.
because I've seen other writers do it, and I think Stephen King talks about this in his book on writing, and he said like edit when he passes his book to the editor, the editor will pull him up and go, why have you used this really long word that people just won't know? And he kind of just very snivelly at the editor. But I tend to back the editor in that case. I do think I have seen sometimes. I think I was reading it. I was rereading American Gods actually with Neil Gaiman, a really good book. But there's times he uses words that stops me and go, wait, I got to look that word up, and then it's not like I look the word up and go, oh right, great. That's the meaning, great. It's like the meaning really doesn't make sense even in the sentence, and you're like, right, okay, and then the flow's gone a little bit. I do
Yeah.
think I think writers do need to have a bit more,
I
self
I think
censorship, really.
that's a really interesting thing. You could probably do an entire podcast on that. But because like some of it's like based on the times, like when the book was written. You have to kind of
Yes.
differentiate there. But I do love books that have like what I would call like what do you call it? Low frequency words, big words. I do like that though because I think it kind of like it makes it interesting or it makes you like I'm okay with looking words up in some like I read books where that's like a big draw for the book. So I like, but if you're like that, if
I'm yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm very open-minded on this. I typically use said, shouted, asked, but I think in my first book, Jack Strong, I think I used whole spectrum. J.K. Rowling uses a whole spectrum. I think it just, I don't think the read, I'll be honest, I don't think most readers care. I honestly don't. I think it's at the end of the day, it's all about finding balance, and it's all about what does the reader want, or what does the reader that will read most of it want. What do they want to do? I think when writers or publishers or editors go, oh, sorry, you're using whispered too much. Do the readers care? I don't think they do. I think for showing and telling, I tend to believe in like showing over telling at the very least for like a reference point. That as a writer, I want to show not tell. But there's going to be times where I'll tell. But if I start thinking the other way, if I start thinking, hey, it's okay to tell, I think my writing will just get worse, and I'll just stop. Listen, I read something. It was on Instagram. It was about a week or two ago, and it was like you get many writers on there, and they show like examples of their writing, and nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But there was one excerpt, and it was really telling. You got a character in a scene, and there's no suspense. There's no surprise. There's no like, hey, I gotta work, I gotta think to work things out. And this idea about writing is thinking, but for me, reading is thinking too. You should you're not just reading it like ba 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 ba. In your mind, you're thinking what's going on. What does the character think, feel? What's going to happen next? What kind of environment is this? But if the writer is just going, yeah, I'm just going to tell you everything. it's it's boring, being honest. As a reader, I find it boring. Yeah, yeah. It's like okay, yeah, 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 yeah. No, you're right. It's like an intricate ballet. It's a hard one to kind of classify and categorize. I find. Like you're doing. Listen, I always say as well, like talking about language and like I always say dialogue, and I've made a couple of videos about this, and I said, if you want to have exposition, if you want to tell the reader some important information that they need to know, and we'll assume for the argument they do need to know it. A really good, easy go-to is get the characters to talk about it. And it's interesting because then they discuss it, and you can find out a bit more about the characters. I saw one recently by the American author Brandon Sanderson where a character reads a book where that has got the important information in it. So it is exposition. It's just done in a clever way. I'm all for that. It's finding that balance. We will all tell. And another thing I say is if you really have to get some exposition down, you can do it in two sentences or less. I don't think there's yeah, 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 yeah. No, I totally agree. Okay, Travis, I think we can end things there and wrap things up. Yeah, great talking to you as always. You're welcome back on my show anytime. Okay.